morning. My name is Eduardo Gonzalez, and I'm a postdoc at the University of Denver in Anna Share Lab. So today I will present the results of a review of literature that we have done on how restoration of riparian vegetation has been implemented and evaluated in the world. So we think that this information can be useful to give us some clue on how to assess the success of our projects in the context of Tamarix control. Okay, so to give you a little bit of a context, this project is part of a larger project that is called Bosque. This is the laser. This is okay. It doesn't matter. Don't worry. Well, this project is part of a larger project called S4S, whose main goal is to find universal criteria to declare success in floodplain forest restoration project. This is a project that was funded by the European Commission in the 7th Framework Program, and well, pretty much the idea and how this project was born is because we were aware of the similarities between rivers in the semi-arid area of Europe, the Mediterranean area, where I come from, and the rivers in the American West. Like, for example, in these two pictures, you can see in the picture in the left, there's a picture taken in the Ebro River. It's the largest river in Spain. And you can see how we have a subcanopy of Tamarix that is dominant and native in this system, and an overcanopy of Salicacea species. And you see here in the left, in the right, another picture taken in a river in Colorado with a pretty much the same structure, a subcanopy of Tamarix and an overstory of Salicacea. Thank you. However, even though the structure is so similar, the restoration strategies are very different, as you very well know, because here we try to eradicate the weed, and of course, in the natural environment, we have other kinds of problems. Like it's usually more geomorphic restoration and active introduction of Salicacea plants, what we do to restore the system. But still, we think that there may be some universal criteria that can help us to improve the assessment of restoration projects in the future. So we started by doing this review of 122 articles published in the scientific literature. This work, by the way, has been recently accepted in Journal of Environmental Management. So I hope it will be like in 2-3 months, hopefully, out there. And we focus on 5 main points that we wanted to cover. First is which are the restoration approaches that are being implemented in the world. Second is how has been the use of rest sites and the scale of monitoring. 3, which are the metrics that researchers use to assess success. 4, which are the factors that explain success more often. And finally, if there is some room for improvement for the future. So for the first point for restoration approaches, we found that all the projects that we review in the world can be classified in 5 groups, well, 6 including other categories. The group with the highest number of articles were the hydrogeomorphic restoration. These are projects that can include, for example, dam operations or control flooding, reallocation of dikes, reprofiling of floodplains, etc. We have a second group that we call it active plant introduction. It's the second more frequent. Well, it's basically revegetation with natural species. Both these two first techniques are quite widespread in the world. You see this high concentration in China comes from 2 big projects that are actually very similar to the release in the Colorado Delta that we have seen in the previous session. Well, and then the third group would be the exotic species control, is where, of course, Tamarix control would be following that category. And you see that there is a hotspot for this group in the American West and also in South Africa where they restore acacia and eucalyptus. The fourth one will be what we have called floodplain restitution. Floodplain restitution is in those situations where we used to have a previous land use like agriculture or mining, and then we stopped that use. Those lands were abandoned and then they were incorporated in the landscape natural floodplain. So we have two main hotspots. One is in the Mississippi catchment, where they have been recovering swamps that were used for agriculture purposes, and also in Central Europe, especially in the Rhine and Danube catchments, they restore meadows that were previously used or intensively used for agriculture. The fifth group would be grazing and herbivory control. We have a hotspot in the area of actually it's pretty much in Yellowstone in the northwestern forested mountains of the Pacific coast, but most of the projects come from that project of reintroduction of wolves with cascade effects on the population of elks and the population of salix and other salicaceous species that maybe you're familiar with. So even now we take at the key species that were assessed, we found that 70% of the projects are focusing on key species. 20 of those 122 projects are focusing in Tamarix as key species. And if we look at the world top 5 key species, or the species that have been assessed more often, of course, Populus and Salix, because they are the more widespread species in the northern hemisphere, they are usually being followed very often, but the third species most commonly assessed in the context of evaluation of success in restoration projects is Tamarix, with being 16 of them are in North America and 4 in the natural environment in China. So these are good and bad news. The good news is that we are pioneers in the study of how to eradicate exotic species in a riparian environment, a plant riparian species, but we have very limited information from other countries where we could incorporate their techniques to our assessments. Okay, so for my second point, the use of ref sites and the scale of monitoring, I based this review on the Society for Ecological Restoration International Primer, that they recommend the use of reference sites to assess the fate of restored ecosystems. We have defined reference sites in 3 ways. Positive reference site would be where we want to be, so our desirable state. A negative reference site would be the starting point in restoration, so for us, let's say, it would be a monoculture of Tamarix. And trajectories would be when we measure one metric, like can be diversity, for example, in a restore system, and then we follow that metric over time. So something surprising that we found is that it's much more common that researchers have used trajectories of change in their published works rather than ref sites. But we think that the definition of ref site can be tricky, and it's also a little bit risky because it can show if we don't accomplish with the goals, these results are more appealing. However, if we are reporting change over time, it's easier to report success, even though we are still far from the conditions that are supposed to be the best conditions. Well, if we look at the 20 projects dealing with Tamarix, it's pretty much the same tendencies. There was just 1 project using positive reference sites, 3 projects using negative reference sites, and 16 using trajectories. Well, by the way, I have the detailed list of papers if anyone is interested. For the scale of monitoring, if we look at these 2 axes, this will be the temporal axis, the space in the y-axis. What we observe is that most of the projects are assessing success at a very local scale, usually scales smaller than the meander, and usually not comparing projects that have been implemented by different agencies, so like what I call singular projects. And also, we look at the temporal scales, it's usually projects that have been restored recently that are more frequently assessed. we need some information about projects that were at all, but maybe after some time that information can be very valuable. In fact, there are still 25 projects that are assessing at large spatial and large temporal scales. We think this is interesting to find universal patterns. If we want to make the science of ecological restoration to go further, it's interesting to try to zoom out and look at those patterns a little bit more often. If we now look at what has been done for the 20 papers that we have read for Tamarix, it's pretty much the same idea. We have, and even worse actually, we have 10% of projects only assessing independent projects across regions, and many of them also assessing projects that were quite recent. From these 4 projects that have been assessed at a local scale, but in all, 3 of them are in the natural environment in China, so there is information about only 1 in the context of green Tamarix and exotic species. And we have these 2 that I'm sure many of you know about them. The first paper working with large spatial and temporal scales was published in 2006 by Rebecca Harris and Ron Kieber. They were basically looking at the effects of removal versus negative reference sites in 33 sites along the Colorado and Rio Grande catchments, using a consequence of going from 1 to 11 years. And the main result was that Tamarix cover could be reduced, but the recovery of the plant community was quite poor. The second paper dealing with these multiple scales is the paper by my colleague Anna Scher and Craig Rassi and Robin May. Here they were studying the effects of not only removal but also active introduction of vegetation, native vegetation, in 28 sites, also in the Colorado and Grand rivers, using a consequence going from 1 to 18 years. And here they pretty much found that best results were obtained when the sites got access to water, either by having high precipitation or being at short distance from the main channel. And also the plantations that were more successful were those that were using shared species that were native. But for those 2 works, these 2 works were done in the 2003 and 2005, so there is not information about the effects of the emitters on the plant community, or at least not information published at those scales. So as part of our project, we are also collecting a database of restore sites, including little sites, where we have been following the plant composition response after the treatment, and also a bunch of environmental and management variables. We want to investigate more about the criteria and the factors playing success in our projects. This is a work that I'm still doing, but hopefully I will be able to present next year in Grand Junction. So hopefully I can see you there. Well, coming back to the review, to the third point, metrics of success. Also, the Society for Ecological Restoration has recommended the use of different groups of metrics. There's a very nice paper published in 2005 in Restoration Ecology, where there is a description of metrics that can be used to assess success for different existing compartments and focusing to vegetation. Vegetation can be decomposed in composition and diversity, structure, and vegetation process. What people do more often is assessing the structure. It's usually easier to measure, and it can be targeted to your target species well. But I would say that in the context of sort of control, it's important that we focus our attention also in the vegetation composition and diversity, because we are aware of secondary invasions happening in the restore site. And this is something that is still done quite often, but I think it's a good recommendation for our project in the Tamarix context. Something else that was quite striking from these results is that we found just a few papers that were using metrics measured at the landscape scale with those information. It's very interesting that even though if we look at the proportion of particles that I mean, at the scale for the implementation of the actual restoration works, we look at the proportion of particles for the hydromorphic techniques and the grazing control techniques. We see that most of those projects are implementing their works at the catchment scale. However, when we do the assessment, there's a mismatch between the implementation and the evaluation. I think by incorporating more landscape metrics, because we know that rivers are changing more selective habitats, integrative restoration should take that into account. And it hasn't been done so often as we have expected. Well, for the Tamarix, pretty much regarding the metrics, we found the same patterns. I would say that as a take home message after reading so many papers, that there is not a perfect metric, like a magic recipe. It really depends on your goal, that a good metric is going to fit. But still, I think we can learn from our works. The fourth point, the factors for success, we divided the factors in abiotic and biotic. For the abiotic factors, the hydromorphic regime, of course, we know it's the main driver of this kind of ecosystem, and it has been measured very often in the assessment of restoration. Also, other properties like soil management, very important in the context of restoration. And something quite surprising, I think, is that biological interactions happen very often as a main main reason for success. For example, in our case, interaction between the seedlings of Populus helix versus Tamarix. There are a few studies that have been looking at that in the American West. Well, and again, pretty much we have the same trends for the 20 papers where we assess the Tamarix control project. Well, just to finish and give a few words to wrap it up, I think that we have to work a little bit more on define and use both the positive and reference sites, what we call negative and positive reference sites. Don't be scared of using those and try to put your restoration into that context. Second thing is that we need to do more comparisons across projects and over time. So we try to zoom out and find more general patterns that can help us for the future. Third one would be, as I have just said, report landscape metrics that are especially important for our ecosystem, for required ecosystems. Finally, report failure. It's very rare that failure is reported, especially when people report results from a singular project. The only occasions where you find some projects that were not successful is because they are part of a larger project or comparisons between multiple projects. And there is a lot of information that we can learn from failure, sometimes more often than from success, unfortunately. All right. So with that said, I want to thank my funding sources, again, the European Commission and the 7th Framework Program. Here I leave you the reference of the work. Hopefully it will be out in a couple of months, and my email address.
Thank you for that very interesting presentation. I think one of the key points I get from you, instead of focusing on trajectories and trend analysis, trying to get a sense of reference sites, but it seems especially challenging, for instance, here in the American West, if we're looking at Tamarix, it's an introduced species, which really changes the dynamic of what a reference site really classically is going to be defined as. So how do you get around that when you're dealing with a new organism in an existing landscape where the classic assessment of what a reference site?
Yeah, I think this is because we have the tendency to think that reference sites are static. They are not. So we can actually compare the trajectories of change of the ref sites versus the trajectories of change of restore sites. And I think that could partially solve that situation. But I think the fact that we know that the trajectories of change in Tamarix are so unpredictable makes it even more important that we assess change over time. So we are really sure that we are not assessing our outcome based on a snapshot in a certain moment. Did I respond your question?